Hey guys, Timmy is here to wish. Timmy, don't kick that off. To wish you guys happy Father's Day. I'm sure there are not too many fathers watching, but to all the wives, all three of you, wives, moms, sisters, whatever, happy Father's Day from someone who is yet to become a father. Well, both of us, but nevertheless, happy Father's Day. Um, Sharon, good to see you. I hope you're doing well. Stephanie, I don't know if Stephanie's like on a walk right now, but based on the Instagram, it appears that that's the case. So um, hopefully we'll see Stephanie maybe on the replay. But I mean, one or two of you, as far as I'm concerned, are sufficient in order to, get the show on the road. To me, it is important to keep the Van Gogh narrative at this point in the story rolling along because if you spend too much time away from it, you miss the portents that are starting to line up. Does that make sense? So you may remember that we finished on this letter where Gorgan says to Vincent, "Is your brother away on a journey?" Right? And he's actually trying to use Vincent to get to his brother who's got the money, right? And just note how short the letter is, basically two longish paragraphs, and the second one's shorter than the first. And basically, where's your brother? And then, and so now we're going to deal with the very next letter. It's dated 9 September 1888. Did we deal with this letter? Anyway, if we have, we're just going to be sort of reviewing what we know. But anyway, we're going to be starting tonight with this. Well, certainly tonight where I am. Lynn Lippy says Timmy probably looks at you as dad. I think so. I think so. I've got some bad news. I obviously don't really want to be talking about that here, but my vehicle got broken into. My garage door was open this morning. The remote for the garage, which was in the vehicle, just the remote by itself for the garage, that was taken. The glove compartment was open. The vehicle wasn't actually broken into because it wasn't locked. Because it was inside the garage, I didn't think it needed to be. But it's effectively the fourth kind of incident in not that long period of time. So I've had a hoodie stolen, a battery, something that charges your car battery in my garage stolen. Someone who stayed here while I was away, laptop stolen, and now this. So it's really the fourth incident, and so now I'm starting to get pretty concerned, and obviously I need to take serious action. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a backdrop. But yeah, I'll maybe talk to you guys about that a little bit later. But that is just a little bit of context to where I am right now on Father's Day. Um, okay, so let's go to this letter. Um, let's do it like that, right? And Vincent says, I've just mailed a sketch of the new picture, the Night Cafe. And then he says, yesterday I was busy furnishing the house, just as the postman and his wife told me the two beds to be really substantial. Hold on, is this playing? Let me just stop it if it is. Is the sound okay? Wow, is Iceland here? By the way, Iceland, I actually only just watched that video that you put up. So someone told me they saw it and thought it was so cute, and so I only watched it for the first time today. I did thank you, but thank you again for putting it together. I will put it up, a link to it on one of my channels. So again, thank you for that. Magical Mother says, I only have about 30 minutes tonight. Okay, well, hopefully catch you on the replay. okay, shall we get going? So he says he found 2 beds to be really substantial and that they will come to 150 francs a piece. So beds are pretty, if you think about it, going to, it's a pleasure, Iceland, going to, what's the word, traveling from Paris or to Arles is quite expensive. It costs about 100 francs, right? A bed is even more expensive. So it just gives you an idea. Like it's almost like if you imagine quite an expensive airfare, almost like, bear in mind this is a long time ago, so costs were different then. But if you almost compare going by rail from Paris to Arles to flying from London to South Africa, I don't know if it's a fair comparison, but if it is, that a bed is more expensive than flying from London to South Africa. Again, I don't know if it's a fair comparison, but if it is, it's quite an interesting comparison. Anyway, he says, I found everything that they told me about prices was true. So he is also quite flabbergasted. He says, so I had to change my tack, and this is what I've done. I've bought one walnut bed and another in white. I'm not sure if that's the right word, which will be mine and which I'll paint later. I would imagine even today a walnut bed, like a wooden bed made out of wood, obviously, but made out of walnut wood, like today would be pretty expensive, like Johnny Depp's bed. Anyway, he says, then I got bedclothes for one of the beds and 2 mattresses. If Gauguin comes or someone else, there is his bed ready in a minute. I wanted to arrange the house from start, not for myself only, but so as to be able to put someone else up too. Naturally, this has swallowed up the greater part of the money. With the rest, I bought 12, that's a lot, eh? 12 chairs. Like, why not just 3 chairs? 12 chairs. I mean, is he hoping to have like a exhibition with half the townsfolk in his home? 12 chairs, a mirror, and some necessities. Altogether, it means that next week already I shall be able to go and live there. So, can you? So the poll question is, how's it go? Was Gauguin's imminent arrival, imminent meaning within the next couple of weeks, I guess, was it having an impact on Van Gogh's mental health? And so we basically mean, is it changing his mood? Is it changing his is it changing his psychology? But obviously for the worse, right? That's kind of what that question is kind of getting at. And so far, all 9 of you have voted yes. And we're gonna examine to what extent that yes is yes, right? In these letters. And so you can see he's not just thinking about Gauguin arriving, he's already spending money, quite big money. And he's starting to kind of get worked up about it. He's starting to anticipate, imagine. Bear in mind he's an artist. Bear in mind he's a creative fellow. And so you can kind of hardly blame him for starting to sort of visualize a change in what's the word, like a change in the dynamic or a change in the scenario that he finds himself in, right? A change in scene. And so he's already changing um, a house that he's not even living in yet in anticipation. He doesn't even live there himself, and he's preparing it for someone else that's not even there yet, right? So you can see that he's investing more and more of himself. It's not only a question of money that he's investing; he's also investing himself personally and emotionally, right? And the question is he over investing, right? Is he over investing? Is he getting too excited? And what happens when that does happen? And anyone that can kind of happen with anyone. You may have a birthday coming up, or Christmas, or a holiday, or you're going to meet someone, and you get so you anticipate it to such an extent that when it eventually happens, it's a letdown. Maybe it's a movie, right? And so one's got to be careful with great expectations, right? Um, Linda P, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so he then says, for a visitor, there will be the prettier room upstairs, which I shall try to make as much as possible like the boudoir of a really artistic woman. Quite a weird approach. Is saying that he's going to make the I think what he means by that is the prettier bedroom. He's saying there's a nicer room upstairs, and he's going to make that feel like the boudoir of a really artistic woman. Now, bear in mind, I think he's anticipating a man staying there. And I presume he's talking about the bedroom. Maybe it's a lounge, but who knows? Anyway, I think he's referring to a bedroom. Do you guys agree with that? Because then he says, then there will be my own bedroom, which I want extremely simple, but with large, solid furniture, the bed, chairs, and table all in white. I think that should be, I don't know if deal, is it not teal? I don't know. Deal just seems like a weird word. Is there such a word for wood? DEAL. Anyway, um, what you what I think you can really appreciate in these two paragraphs is what a self-sacrificing, what do you call it? Self kind of self-effacing. What a self-effacing fellow Van Gogh is. In other words, he doesn't have airs and graces. He doesn't have a big ego in a certain respect. I mean, he can be quite dog-headed and or pig-headed and sorry, Timmy, pig-headed and dogmatic and stubborn and whatever. But he certainly doesn't have airs and graces. He doesn't need a fancy thing. And of course, Gauguin does. Gauguin does feel like he needs some fussing around him, right? And you can almost anticipate that Gauguin is a high maintenance chap and Van Gogh isn't. And so are they even going to get along just on the basis of that? But here you have a very good illustration in his own words where he says, I want my bedroom extremely simple, right? And I don't mind if the other room is extravagant, pretty, um, whatever, lots of comforts or whatever it is. And so he's okay to, um, in a way, have a simple setup, but he's kind of okay to struggle and suffer, and also so that somebody else can not prosper but be comfortable, right? And what I want you to think about, and it might be taking this analogy a little bit far, but what I want you to think about is that idea of I'm going to invite someone into this house and I'm going to live in this basic little room and I'm going to give you the much better room and I'm going to furnish it for you. It's not just that he comes and he finds a house and the one room's better than the other and so he kindly just offers. He's actually the one spending the money and actually going to the effort to decorate it and to create it, right? And he's basically saying he's not even making two rooms that are similar. He's saying this is the much better room and I give it to you and I hope you're going to be comfortable there and I'm prepared to be I can be comfortable in a very simple thing. Now I want you to think about that self-effacing psychology in the context of he loses his ear. Does he say that person did it? Or does he take it upon himself? Do you see what I'm trying to get at? In other words, it's the same almost martyr complex, right? And that is something that Gauguin seemed to recognize about him, that he liked to be kind of like a martyr, he liked to suffer, kind of thing. And then you take that same thing into the suicide narrative where he says, no, 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 don't blame anybody else, I did it. All I'm saying is, can you see that there's an analogy, hypothetically, I mean, I could be wrong, but hypothetically, there seems to be an analogy for him putting himself second when, should he really be doing that? He's paying for everything, or his brother's paying for everything. Shouldn't the artist that's coming there actually be getting the second best room? It's like the Van Goghs are providing board and lodging, or shouldn't the Van Goghs be getting the best lodging for themselves? And the guest kind of gets to stay there and paint, but he needs to prove himself. What Van Gogh's actually doing is he's putting himself second. Bear in mind, he is an unproved quantity. He is a struggling artist, the quintessential struggling artist. But the other side is that he's basically acknowledging that I'm second in this hierarchy, and it's the same thing in the ear incident and with the situation where he dies at the end. Isn't he also putting himself second in that scenario? Do you follow? You might not agree with the scenarios I'm giving, but you see that there's at least a psychological resonance there. See what you guys say. Iceland says they seem very different to me, but have things in common. Magical Mother says Gauguin really was his hero, wasn't he? So, guys, give me a little bit of feedback. I've put out a scenario, not a scenario, but an analogy. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, does it make sense? What do you guys think? I mean, do you agree that it is quite an interesting way of um, thinking about it? Put it that way. Hello. Just waiting for an answer. Not sure if you guys are watching or using this as ASMR. I'm still just waiting for a response. So a couple have come through here. Sharon says, Van Gogh sounds like a people pleaser. It's very difficult to put yourself first. But bear in mind, he probably recognizes that in an artistic sense, he has to prove himself still. So it's maybe maybe it's that aspect as well. Also bear in mind, it's not money that's coming out of his pocket, it's Theo's money. And he's probably aware of that as well. So on the hierarchy of Theo, Gauguin, and Vincent, Vincent probably puts himself at the bottom. Maybe he puts Gauguin at the top, but Vincent himself's definitely not first or second in that hierarchy, if that makes sense. Vincent probably also puts Theo higher than himself because he's not capable of looking after himself, right? Um, Linda says, if you look deeper, I think there are other examples of him doing that. Yeah. Remember, we spoke about Gabby Petito as well. This thing of why didn't she just tell the truth? Someone had hurt her. Why didn't just tell the truth? Well, the answer is because she doesn't want her adventure to end. Van Gogh was also on an adventure, on an artistic adventure. And so, in the same way with Gabby, where you had numerous incidents, it wasn't just the Moab stop. There were other incidents as well that Rose spoke about. Van Gogh doesn't want his adventure to end either. And you could say that Van Gogh's Moab stop was the incident. So he also doesn't want to just, have to go home or stop whatever he's doing. He doesn't want his van life, his artistic van life adventure to end. And so I'm just saying that's one way of thinking about it. I hope that makes sense. Thanks, Iceland. Lynn Lippy says, I never really thought about it, but you're right about it. It's as if he's telling Gauguin is more important right off the bat. Magical Mother says, it is an interesting way of looking at it. Living in the Pines is making jam and listening. Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so I'm glad you're with me. I was just sort of checking in a way. Okay, so let's continue. So he says downstairs will be the studio and another room, a studio too, but at the same time a kitchen. So what you kind of have here is the kind of an introduction to a situation where you're going to have two artists living in the same building with two totally different bedrooms and with kind of adjoining studios. What do you think is going to happen in that situation? You've got two studios right next to each other. Well, you're going to have one artist looking at the other one's work and the other artist looking at the other one's work. And bear in mind, of the two artists, one is um, successful and going to be successful, and the other one's not successful and is going to continue not to be successful. And so, if you think about it, how can this not end in tears, right? The artist who's successful is kind of has every right to have sort of a sense of contempt and a sense of superiority, and to some extent be um, kind of sneering, right? Um, and the artist who is not selling um, should kind of expect to be kind of criticized because the way what he's doing is weird. He paints extremely quickly. He has a very exaggerated style of putting up the paint on very thickly. He himself is strange. He's sort of not well dressed and he seems shabby. And the other artist thinking, people need to respect you. People need to look at you and feel like, wow, you know something that they don't. Or people need to kind of have this mystique about you and you, this shabby tramp. That's quite like an oddball, and you actually make us artists look shabby, right? And what Gauguin's missing in that whole thing is that Vincent's actually an extremely hard worker, and he is getting somewhere. He does have a couple of problems as well, but he is actually getting somewhere. And it's difficult for the artist who's successful to kind of acknowledge, I guess, some of the points Van Gogh's making. It's like, yeah, well, hypothetically, that's true, but practically speaking, I mean, you not exactly what's the word? You're not living the successful narrative that you're talking. You can talk big, but let's say it in your art, kind of thing. If that makes sense. I don't know whether the studio is similar. Was the one better than the other? Well, if the one studio is sort of a kitchen, I think you can kind of imagine that that's probably Van Gogh's studio, right? Chelsea, good to see you here. Chelsea says, I hope I didn't miss a lot. I don't think you did. Just 4 burglaries. Okay, so let's go back to the letter. So he says, someday or other you shall have a picture of the little house itself in bright sunshine, or else with a window lit up and a starry sky. That's quite a, I don't know, it's quite a fairy tale little picture that is sketching with words, isn't it? He has actually started talking about starry skies quite often. And you can imagine how starry the skies were in 1888, right? Although having said that, that was within the Industrial Revolution, and Monet was painting smoky, like smoky cityscapes. and so it's not as though there was no smoke, but little rural towns like All probably were. If you looked up, you probably did see an incredible veil of stars, right? So we don't actually have any photos of the Yellow House because it was destroyed by a bomb, but we do have this picture that Van Gogh painted. And it's not at night though, but you do get a sense of what it must have looked like. And the movie Loving Vincent kind of animates this and gives it a little bit of additional life. So there it is. It's this building over here. You can see it's got green shutters. It's double story, probably 2 bedrooms at the top, and then there would be the 2 studios at the bottom. And then there's a cafe over there, and I think that is the one. Let me think. No, that's actually not the one that he talks about in the next letter. It's actually further into all. Anyway, so that's that. Okay, so he says, henceforth you can feel that you have your country house in all, for I am very anxious to arrange it so that you will be pleased with it and so that it will be a studio in an absolutely individual style. And so it is September, almost the middle of September 1888. And it's at this point that he basically says to Theo, you can feel good. You've got a you know, I wouldn't say he owns the country house because they're renting it, but you have a country house at your disposal, and it's basically our studio in the south. And of course, they're only going to hold on to it for basically 3 months. They're going to have it basically October, November, December, and then that fairy tale will be over and over sort of forever. So that's the other thing is 3 months before disaster, a fairy tale sort of starts, if I can put it that way. When you think about Amanda Knox going to Perugia, she goes to Perugia, and how long does her fairy tale last, right? Brian Koberger goes to Pullman. How long does his fairy tale last, right? You go when you go somewhere, you go there with anticipation, expectation. You meet some people there, the anticipation, expectation also changes. Some things are exciting, some things make you happy, but then there are also some things that are incredibly, crushingly disappointing. And is that what happened to Van Gogh, right? Can you feel how the stars are starting to align? How we are going into a phase of Van Gogh's life where he's going to get locked in, right? Can you feel that? Okay, so he says, now he's thinking even bigger. He says, if say a year from now you come here and to Marseille for your vacation, it will be ready then, and the house, as I intended, will be full of pictures from top to bottom. Well, that is the dream, that's the fairy tale, and that is not what happened. Instead, and I mean, I'm not making this up. Instead of that fairy tale, when Theo came to All, and it was like not a time he wanted to come to All. It was sort of between Christmas and New Year, so he was sort of with his fiance, right? And he wanted to have a nice sort of Christmas and New Year with the love of his life. Meanwhile, there's an emergency in All, and when he arrived in All, guess what? He found a bloodbath. Literally, he found a bed soaked in blood. And people actually thought when they found Van Gogh there, firstly because of the amount of blood, and secondly because he was just lying there, that they thought that somebody had died. And so think about that. That's the nightmare that is actually waiting for both Van Gogh and his brother, Vincent, and his brother. and look at where they are now, thinking in these fairy tale sort of concepts, right? The question still remains: how did it go from this to that? Like, what is the missing link there? And that's what we're trying to figure out. So he says, the room you will have then, or Gorgan, if he comes, will have white walls with a decoration of great yellow sunflowers, right? In the morning, when you open the window, you see the green of the gardens and the rising sun and the road into the town. And I can confirm that that's true. If you, when you walk to the yellow house, you sort of pass through kind of the city gates, if that's the word. So the old town of All kind of terminates, and then not that far from where it terminates is kind of a park, right? And it's got sort of oak trees and so on. On the one side is the river, and then on the other side is the yellow house. And so if you turn your back to the yellow house, what you have in front of you is like a green park with a few um, oak trees, and then the old town like right in front of you. And that's what he's talking about. He says you will see the green of the gardens and then the road into the town. He says, you will see these great pictures of the sunflowers, 12 or 14 to the bunch, crammed into this tiny boudoir with its pretty bed and everything else dainty. It will not be commonplace. In the studio, the red tiles of the floor, the walls and ceiling white, rustic chairs, white deal table, and I hope a decoration of portraits. It will have a feeling of Dumier about it, and I dare predict it will not be commonplace. So he's wanting to create a special, unusual um, home or environment that is going to mean a lot to him and to many other people as well. He says, and now do look for some lithographs of Dumier's for the studio and some Japanese things, but there's no hurry for all of that. It's only when you find duplicates of them and some things of Delacroix and ordinary lithographs by modern artists. There's not the slightest hurry, but I have my own plan. I want to make it really an artist's house, not precious, on the contrary, nothing precious, but everything from the chairs to the pictures having character, right? And so what is actually taking place here is Van Gogh for the first time is creating a home of his own. Um, Van Gogh for the first time is having um, a home of his own, right? And I know what that feels like. I was a very sort of itinerant character myself. I worked in South Korea for 4 or 5 years. When I lived there, I didn't really move around there that much, but I did move probably 4 or 5 times in 4 or 5 years. I lived in the UK and I lived there about 2 years and I moved around. I lived in different places there as well. I lived in Bristol, I lived in Edinburgh, I lived in Maidenhead, um, and I lived in different places in London, and I lived in different places in anyway. But the point is, when you uprooted so often, then you get this feeling, I really need to be in one place. I really need a home. I really need a place that is sort of my place. That is sort of what makes where I am right now in my life quite disconcerting, because I feel like I did make a home, that this has been my yellow house for a couple of years. And because of the criminal activity over the past couple of weeks, I'm literally thinking, I think I need to move. And I don't really want to, but I don't want to be a sitting duck either. But anyway, this is about Van Gogh, and it's about this idea that he, for the first time, is going to have a bedroom that is his in a sense. He buys the furniture; it's his for all intents and purposes. Not only that, he's also going to be creating an environment for another artist, and I think there is quite an interesting power dynamic going on there, where it's you have the power to create a space for another person, right? You are an artist that can't sell his work, and it's being left to you to create a space for another artist who is selling his work, right? And the part that's sort of fictional about all of this is none of it is coming from Van Gogh's earnings. It's not his money, really, right? And so it is quite a dizzying place, I think, for him to be. I mean, do you see what I'm saying? It is quite a dizzying setup, I guess. Anyway, so he says, um, about the beds, I bought country beds, big double ones instead of iron ones. That gives an appearance of solidity, durability, and quiet. If it takes a little more bedding, so much the worse, but it must have character. Now, I don't know. I don't know whether iron beds would be cheaper. I really have no idea. Um, what do you guys think? Do you think iron beds in 1888 would be cheaper? He says, I'm very lucky to have a faithful charwoman. You know, that's obviously a kind of a domestic worker. Except for that, I should not have dared to begin living at home. She's quite old and has many and varied offspring, and she keeps my tiles clean and red. I cannot. So he's even got sort of a lady cleaning up after him. I mean, if you think about it, Van Gogh is sort of living at this point in his life, he's living quite a life of luxury. And of course, it's gonna when he lives in the asylum, it's gonna be a big fall down right from that point as well. Loris, welcome. Snow Lion, welcome as well. Welcome to you guys. Happy Father's Day to your fathers, dads, husbands, brothers, whatever. Okay, so he goes on to say, I cannot tell you how much pleasure it gives me to find a big, serious job like this. So can you see that he's actually he's been kind of in a work mode mood for a really long time, right? He's been painting and kind of working and sweating in the sun, and now his mindset is shifting just in a different way. He's now creating these spaces, and as he puts things into a room, is imagining what's going to go on in that room, and is in a way, I guess, identifying himself with this structure that is becoming it's going from a sort of nondescript nondescript walls and doors to something that symbolizes himself in terms of color, in terms of what he puts inside it, in terms of how it feels, and in terms of what it looks like, right? And so he says, for it's going to be, I hope, a real scheme of decoration that I'm starting on now. As I told you, I'm going to paint my own bed. There will be 3 subjects on it, perhaps a nude woman. I think that tells you something about Van Gogh as well. You have a sense of him as a very hard worker and a guy who is really struggling, but he's also a 35-year-old single man with the libido of a 35-year-old. And yeah, you get a little bit of a insight into what's the word? He wants to actually paint a nude woman on his bed. Why? Because that's something that is, I guess, preoccupied with, right? He says, I haven't yet decided, or perhaps a child in a cradle. Okay, so that you might have painted a child in a cradle. He says, I don't know, but I shall take my time over it. I don't feel any hesitation now about staying here because ideas for my work are coming to me in abundance. So can you see his mindset is changing? He is starting to get caught up in excitement, right? Um, if you think about it, he's someone who would go out every day, paint, come back, um, write a letter, next day go out, paint, come back, write a letter. And there wasn't really much variety to his life, and he's just working very hard as an artist. This change is really invigorating him. He's thinking about things in a totally different way. He's getting really excited. He says, I intend to buy something for the house every month. And with some patience, the house will be worth something because of the furniture and the decorations. I must warn you that soon I shall have to send a big order for paints for the autumn. which I think is going to be absolutely amazing. On second thought, I'm sending you the order enclosed. So I think he says this, and then next thing he just writes down the order. I'm not going to wait till the autumn. So there you have it in his own words. I think it's going to be absolutely amazing. That is where his heart and his mind are, and you can't blame him. You can't blame him for getting excited. I would get excited too, right? Magical Mother says he sounds so excited about his own home. Okay, well, I hope you sleep well. Take care. Iceland, are you not a mod? We don't really need any moderating here, Iceland. We all well behaved, I think. So if you really want to be a mod, I guess I can make you one. But I mean, it's not like they are horrible people. There are not enough people who actually care. Add as a moderator. Happy. Now you're a mod. I hereby knight you Team Peachtree mod. Snowline says, sorry I came in late. Does anyone know which book Nick is reading from? It sounds fascinating. I'm reading from, I'll put a link to the website, Van Gogh Letters, right? You can just follow on from there. Anyway, he says, in my picture of the night cafe, I've tried to express the idea that, and this is so interesting. So he's referring to this picture, right? And, you know, people might, on other channels or even subscribers on True Crime Rocket Science might say, I don't know why Nick is covering Van Gogh. I mean, isn't he a true crime person? Well, look at what Van Gogh says here. He says, in my picture of the night cafe, I've tried to express the idea that the cafe is a place where one can ruin oneself, go mad, or commit a crime. So I've tried to express, as it were, the powers of darkness in a low public house by soft Louis XIV green and malachite, contrasting with yellow green and harsh blue greens, and all this in an atmosphere like a devil's furnace of pale sulfur. And what is so ironic about this is that he's talking about something that is almost like a presentiment to what ultimately did happen. Didn't he go mad? Didn't someone commit a crime? Didn't Van Gogh actually ruin himself? And he's drawing a cafe, and it's almost like his mainlining is tuning in to the fates. Don't you get that sense? Because it's September 1888, and very, very soon, someone is going to ruin himself, someone is going to go mad, and arguably someone does commit a crime. It's quite shocking in its accuracy, isn't it? What does Iceland say? Cool. Okay. Do you follow what I'm getting at? So he goes on to say, I've tried to, he says, with all the appearance of Japanese gaiety and the good nature of Tartarin, but what would Monsieur Tierstig say about this picture when he said before a Sisley, the most discreet and gentle of the Impressionists, I can't help thinking that the artist who painted this was a little tipsy. If he saw my picture, he would say that it was delirium tremens in full swing. Almost like you must have been drunk when you painted that. You can almost see Van Gogh is teasing and provoking, trying to provoke his teachers with what he's producing. He says, I see absolutely nothing to object to in your suggestion of exhibiting once at the Revue Independente, provided, however, I am no obstacle to the others who usually exhibit there. Only then we ought to tell them that I should like to reserve for myself a second exhibition after this one of studies proper. Then next year I will give them the decorations of the house to exhibit when they are complete. Not that I am so keen on it, but in order that the studies should not be confused with finished compositions, and so as to announce in advance that the second exhibition will be one of studies. For so far, hardly any of them except the SOA and the Night Cafe are attempts at finished pictures. Just as I am writing to you, the poor peasant who is like a caricature of father happens to have come into the cafe. This is really an incredible little um, aside from Van Gogh, because it's kind of imparting to us a little glimpse into a moment in his life, a little glimpse into reality, where he says, guess what, just while I'm writing, that dude that looks a bit like a caricature of dad is just walking to the cafe. And then he says the resemblance is terrible all the same. Just saying, that guy reminds me of dad, kind of a caricature of him, but whenever I see him I think of dad. He says, especially the uncertainty and the wariness and the vagueness of the mouth, I still feel it is a pity that I've not been able to do it. I add to this letter an order for paints, which is not exactly urgent, but I have so many plans in my head, and the autumn promises to give so many magnificent subjects that I simply do not know if I'm going to start 5 canvases or 10. By the way, the that autumn promise that he talks about, autumn would be the autumn of 1888, would be the single occasion that Van Gogh would produce a picture that somebody would buy, right? It was the Red Vineyard. So it's quite interesting that in this letter he talks about, I need to get supplies for autumn, and it's almost like he's saying, I expect there to be magnificent subjects. Well, one of them would be this one. And I really like this picture. I must say, I really do like this picture. I don't know what you guys say. I just think it's, I don't know, it's warm. It's quite epic in terms of that sort of line of trees. There's that quintessential Van Gogh sun, right? It really is it's a lovely work of art. And this is kind of a reminder of what he can do when he tries, because you kind of get the feeling sometimes he just doesn't put enough effort into something that he does. Look at what an incredible execution this is. And what makes it kind of even more incredible is he didn't just dream this up. He was actually there. He went to this vineyard. There were these people in front of him, picking grapes and doing their thing right until the end of the day. And this is what he was trying to capture. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I mean, that looks like a stick man, but for the rest, quite well conceived figures. That ruins it a little bit. But I mean, even that's quite good. You can see the horse looking towards the viewer, right? So I really like this picture, and yeah, he's kind of touching on it. It says the autumn promises to give so many magnificent subjects, and I mean, this picture that he sells, it's from this time. It's from. Let's just have a look at the date of this picture. Um, 3rd November 1888. So he actually painted this when Gauguin was in town. So this picture is really a month and a half away, right? And he didn't produce it when he was in the asylum. He didn't produce it when he was, what's the word? In Orvez. This picture that's really one of his best was just around the corner, right? Um, yeah, definitely is better. What does Deborah say? Hi to the Van Gogh family. Chelsea says it would look amazing in my living room. Mine too. We can bid for it. We'll see who puts up the highest bid. He says, I simply do not know if I'm going to start 5 canvases or 10. It will be just as it was in spring with the orchards in bloom and there'll be no end of summer. So he knows exactly what he intends to do. He wants to catch the seasons, in full bloom, right? If you gave Old Tanguy the coarser color, he would probably do it well. The other fine colors are really inferior, especially the blues. I hope to have improved a little in quality when I prepare the next batch. I'm doing comparatively less and going back over them longer. So there's giving you a really interesting insight into how he's changing his approach. He's saying, I'm not painting as many and I'm going over them a little longer. He says, I've kept 50 francs for the week, so there have been 250 for the furnishing already. All the same, I shall recover them, carrying on like this. And now you can tell yourself that you have a sort of country house, though unfortunately rather far away. But it would cease to be very, very far if there were a permanent exhibition in Marseille. Perhaps in a year's time we shall see that. With a handshake, ever yours, Vincent. And at the time, he was 35 years old. So we're almost at the hour mark, and I'm going to probably do 2 more letters. I'm going to do this letter on the 11th of September, and then I'll do 1 more. And then we'll do Van Gogh letters 60, probably on Wednesday. Okay, that's the plan. Okay, so he says, My dear Theo, enclosed is a letter from Gauguin, which arrived at the same moment as a letter from Bernard. It is just a cry of distress. I'm getting deeper into debt every day, right? And so Gauguin needs Theo's money. Gauguin has gotten himself into debt, and he needs someone who's an art dealer basically to bail him out. It's not like Gauguin is sitting somewhere else and is painting, and he goes to join Vincent when it suits him. It's kind of like the walls are moving in for Gauguin. Gauguin is running out of options, and I think you could argue that Gauguin is actually getting desperate, to be honest. That Theo slash Vincent, but ultimately Vincent van Gogh is Gauguin's last resort. You kind of get the idea that Gauguin wants to do this or try that, and of all the options, the last alternative, the thing that he least wants to do is go and stay with freaking Vincent van Gogh, right? And when he's sort of at wit's end, when Gauguin is sort of out of options, that is when he goes to Vincent, which is not it's not a good situation. I mean, can you imagine being someone's last option? Where you invite someone to come and stay with you, and then they go through all of their better options. By the time they do join you, well, you know what, you were at the bottom of my list. And you may not say that. Gauguin may not say that to Van Gogh, but it probably emerges over time what he actually thinks of Van Gogh, what he actually thinks of himself, right? Okay, Timmy, I'm going to put you down. Okay, let's continue. Right, so he says, I won't enlarge upon what he ought to do. You offer him hospitality here and accept the only means of payment that he has is pictures. So he says, you know what, Theo, you should send Gauguin here to me and have him pay his way in art. He says, but if over and above that he demands that you pay his journey, he's going a bit too far, and at least he ought to make an ample offer of pictures and address himself to you as well as me in terms less vague than every day I go deep into debt, and the journey becomes more and more out of the question. Now, I think what this sort of comes down to, Deborah says, I call us all here the Van Gogh family. Cool. Thanks, Deborah. So can you see Gauguin's pleading poverty, and he's saying, okay, I'll join Vincent, but can you please also pay? Can you pay for everything? Can you pay for me to, like, I don't have any money. I'm totally penniless. Can you send me to the south, which is going to cost 100 francs? Can you accommodate me? Can you pay for my meals? And then I'll just paint for you, and that should be enough. And I mean, if you think about it, the business deal is kind of basically that an artist is going to work and try and produce something, right? But the thing that is sort of strange here is that before the artist has done anything, they've got to pay him money. They've got to give him quite a lot of money just to get him where he needs to be, right? And think about the flip side of that. If it doesn't work out and he doesn't want to be there anymore, isn't he going to say, well, you paid for me to go there. You need to pay to bring me back where I want to be. So then 100 francs becomes 200 francs, right? Anyway, he says, it would be more to the point if he said, I would rather leave my pictures in your hands, since you're kind to me, and incur debts with you who are my friend, and live with my landlord. But his stomach is all wrong, and when one has stomach ache and indigestion, one has no willpower. Now I myself have nothing wrong with my stomach at the moment. Consequently, so this is really important. This is Vincent. We are now at the 11th of September. Remember, the question we want to ask over and over again is, how does Van Gogh go from the picture of health, mental health, physical health, to absolute disaster in now it's down to 3.5 months, right? That's a question we want to ask over and over and over again, because here he says, my brain is freer and I hope clearer. So here he's actually saying that his mental health is actually fine. He doesn't have any, he's not depressed, he's not, if anything, is too happy, right? That's quite a accusation to make against Van Gogh. I mean, didn't he supposedly kill himself in the summer of 1819, and here he's too happy for his own good, right? He says, I think it is absolutely unfair. So he says, firstly, he says, I have nothing wrong with my stomach at the moment, right? So he's saying, physically, there's nothing wrong with me. And then he also says, my brain is freer and clearer. It's a little bit qualified there. He's saying, my brain is clearer. And what do you think he means by my brain is clearer? Well, it means clearer than it usually is, right? He's not saying my brain is clear. He's saying it's clearer than it usually is. It's freer than it usually is, right? But the point is that he self-diagnoses himself basically in mid-September and says, physically and mentally, I'm fine. So again, you've got to ask the question, how was he not fine and ended up losing his ear, right? That's the question we want to ask kind of repeatedly. He says, I think it is absolutely unfair that you who have just sent money, which you yourself had to borrow for the furnishing of the house. So that's actually how they financed this. He had to borrow money to send to his brother to furnish the house, should also have to bear the expense of the journey, meaning Gauguin's journey, especially when the journey is complicated by the payment of the debt. Unless Gauguin pulled everything and let you have all his work so that we keep no accounts but make common cause together. If we had a common purse and make common cause, I think myself that after a few years working in common, we should all profit. This is really important, is that Van Gogh isn't just in it for himself. Van Gogh and Theo that's not the end of the equation. It's Van Gogh, Theo, and someone else, right? He says, I think myself that after a few years working in common, we should all profit. So Van Gogh is working very hard in order to survive as a person and survive as an artist, but he's also working very hard so that Theo continues to support him, right? And he's also aware that there's now a business relationship with another artist. That's really, really important. And you can think about it like Gabby and Brian going on a van life journey, but guess what? So Gabby and Brian are almost like Vincent and Gauguin, right? But somebody else is paying the tab. One of their parents is paying for the whole thing. And so that is what makes it quite complicated to say, oh, you know what? We had a fight and he hit me in the face. Well, guess what? The person who's paying for this is going to say, okay, your adventure's over. Come back. I'm not paying for this nonsense, right? And so because he's not the master of his own fate, he's not paying his own way. He has got to be careful what he tells the person who is paying. Does that make sense? Iceland says, I don't think he ever goes downhill mentally. I think he does, but I don't think it's as precipitous, as serious as a lot of people imagine. It's just different. It's just different to what a lot of people think. So this part is so important to emphasize, is that when Van Gogh is in the ear situation, it's not just what happened to your ear. He's got to protect Theo's interests, which indirectly protects his. When he's in Orvez and is being shot, can he just say that person shot me? When he's also got to protect a situation where they're all trying to profit. Does that make sense? Bear in mind, it's this person who's saying, I don't have anything, I haven't proved myself, so I'm going to take the worst room in this house. And so doesn't he take the worst room in this house in terms of the ear incident? He takes it all upon himself. Doesn't he take the worst room in this house in terms of the gunshot thing? He also takes it all upon himself because he's trying to protect Theo and Theo's interests. He's trying to protect Theo's relationship with the art crowd or whatever. And in my opinion, Van Gogh takes too much on himself. Anyway, he says, because if the combination were arranged this way, you yourself would feel, I do not say happier, but a better artist and more productive than with me alone. So he's saying both he and I will feel strongly that we must succeed because the honor of all three of us is at stake. That's also very important. So when you think about the ear incident, you must think about those words. Why don't you just say what happened? Somebody cut off your ear, just say what happened. No, the honor, not just my honor, but the honor of you and that person is at stake. If I tell the truth, the honor of this person and that person's at stake. When, the Moab stop happened with Gabby Petito, she was technically engaged to Brian. So is she going to, think about it. You engage, you're about to marry someone. Are you really going to, even if they did something really serious, are you really going to create a situation where they're going to possibly be in court and go to jail when you could simply just say that it didn't happen? Someone saw it happened, but do you want someone else to be in charge of your fairy tale? Ison says, like Johnny Depp and his finger. He goes on to say, each is not working for himself alone. And that's also how you need to think about Van Gogh. He's not just in it for himself. He's thinking about this trifecta, effectively. He says, that's how it looks to me. He says, I believe that even if collapse is in the nature of things and bound to come, we must still act in the same way. So in a way, here he's predicting the future. He says, even if there's a collapse in the nature of things, we must still act in the same way, that the honor of all three of us is at stake. and that each of us is not working for himself alone. Can you see that? That's where his psychology is. He says, but more and more I reject the idea of this collapse. When I think of the serenity you see on the faces of the Frans Halses and the Rembrandts, such as the portrait of Old Six, or his self-portrait, or those Frans Halses in Haarlem that we know so well, pictures of old men and women. It is better to have serenity than to be too timorous. What does that word mean? Not quite familiar with that. Showing or suffering from nervousness. Well, it's quite weird of him to be using a word like that.
Timorous.
Right? It's quite weird, because isn't that something that we associate with Van Gogh and even his art, that there's almost a nervous, agitated, electric, vibrating quality to his art?
Timorous.
Timorous. What's another word for timorous? Faint-hearted, fearful. But so, he's saying it's better to have serenity than to be too timorous. Well, guess what? In the approach to Gauguin joining him, he is going to Van Gogh is going to become quite nervous. Also, Gauguin is going to experience Van Gogh as a very nervous character. Maybe nervous is not quite the right word, but a very restless, agitated, intense person. But someone else might interpret all of those kind of energies as nervous energy, and isn't it a kind of nervous energy? So he says, why then such a noise about this Gauguin business? He will do well to come to us, and we would like him to come, but neither he nor we are to let ourselves be crushed. So that also gives you a sense of, in a weird way, Van Gogh can almost read the tea leaves. He can see that a disaster could be in the offing. And if it is, we shouldn't be crushed, and we shouldn't, what does he say here? We must still act even if there's a collapse, we must still act in the same way because of the honor that is at stake. And isn't that why Van Gogh is able to lose his ear and still kind of function? Because he's kind of got a bigger mission that he's already invested in. Isn't that why when he's in the asylum, he's able to persevere? Because what preceded that was this dream that he'd actually invested in, and to some extent he's still holding on to. So you could kind of get the feeling that Van Gogh got crushed by a fairy tale, but the dream, the deeper thing, still carried him out of that dark place. So that makes sense. So he says, on the whole, there was a fine calm about that letter of his, although he left his intentions where we are concerned in the air. Only if this thing is ready to come off, we must have loyalty on his part, right? So what they're saying, and if I understand this correctly, is they're saying, although he's being a little bit unfair to us, even though he's being a little impolite, if that's the word, even though he's being a little unreasonable, we must be loyal to him. We must treat him properly. And that is also the sense that you get going into the air incident, is that loyalty remains in place. Even though I believe Gauguin betrayed the Van Goghs, let them down, basically stabbed them in the back, they maintain loyalty. And then that is a premise to what happens in the summer of 1890. Another way of thinking about it is, in the JonBenet Ramsey case, you have the 911 call on the 23rd of December, where all the Ramsey friends are there together, and they see how a certain situation is dealt with. And you could say covered up, or the police coming to investigate something are misled, or that the explanation given dodges accountability, or whatever way you want to explain it, it ends up being possibly a dress rehearsal for what follows. And that's why I say the ear incident is a dress rehearsal for what happens in the summer of 1890. And so if you understand the ear incident, you understand the gunshot wound that he suffered to his stomach and also how he responds to it. Because at least what we have is he is shot and then he talks. He talks to his brother. He talks to people that are there. There are witnesses. And what do we make of that? Well, this is one way of understanding that. We must have loyalty on his part. Did they have any loyalty in the same way to Gauguin, to Dr. Gachet, right? That's the question. He says, I am rather curious to know what he will say to you himself. I reply to him exactly as I feel, but I do not want to say depressing or dismal or malicious things to so great an artist. So you can see there's a bit of hero worship going on. Snowline says, his paintings definitely look to me as though his mind, body, and paint are all vibrating, shimmering. Several of his paintings are rather disconcerting. There you go. Sharon says, I think it means timid. Okay, so he goes on to say, however, it is already complete enough so that if Gauguin turned up here unexpectedly, we should be able to manage until we had time to turn around. Gauguin is married, and we must thoroughly realize in advance that in the long run, it is not certain that our various interests will be compatible. And I don't know if you guys know this, Gauguin, you know, if you're thinking, I think you're being a little bit unfair. Gauguin's a good guy. You know, it seems like you want him to be a criminal. Gauguin's was just a French artist, maybe a bit rough around the edges. I think you're being a little harsh on him. Well, actually, he abandoned his family and he went and lived in Tahiti with the sort of indigenous folk. So, you know, you can say, well, yeah, but that's not a crime. It certainly shows a malicious, if not capricious person, someone who doesn't give a shit about the people closest to him, someone who should give a shit about people that he lived with once upon a time, people that he supposedly is connected to and close to, right? And so Van Gogh is 100% right to say, on the one hand, Gauguin is married, right? But it's not certain that our various interests will be compatible. You're absolutely right with that. But not because he's married, because he's the kind of person who, you can use the word narcissist or selfish or has an exotic view of himself, whatever description you want to give. But it will turn out to be that Gauguin is the number one person in Gauguin's life is Gauguin, and it's not because he's married; it's because that's the kind of guy he is, and it certainly isn't compatible with a kind of sensitive person. Think about Vincent and the loyalty and the friendship and the consistency and the accountability that he shares with his brother, right? Just think about that relationship. You know, it's siblings, but they actually have a very honorable, honest, to some extent, relationship. And think about Gauguin, who abandons his own wife and children in order to go and have hedonistic fun in Tahiti. Do you think that kind of person is going to be compatible with hardworking, hard-charging, but ultimately a loser Van Gogh? Do you think they're going to be compatible? And so he's absolutely nailing it. Like, you know, if Van Gogh was a true crime dude, and in this letter is absolutely nailing what is in his own future. Are we going to be compatible? me and Gauguin going to be compatible? And the answer is freaking no. Not only is, Gauguin is going to say that. He's going to say to Theo after 2 months, get me the hell out of here. I can't handle another night with your brother. So Vincent, whose hero worships Gauguin, is even aware at this point, before they've even met, that then they may not be compatible. He's talking about various interests, but he's also talking just in general about being compatible. He says that is why in any case of association, the conditions must be very clearly stated so as not to quarrel afterwards. You can analyze this any way you want, but look at the words he's using: compatible, quarrel. It talks about overestimating. Malicious. These are all words that is using in the context of thinking about Gauguin, right? And Gauguin, I think, is actually in some ways a malicious fellow. I mean, what is more malicious than, even if Van Gogh cut off his own ear, what is more malicious than that's when you leave him? I mean, in the dramatizations, it's kind of like Van Gogh is saying to Gauguin, please don't leave me, I can't be alone. And Gauguin and then he cuts off his ear, and Gauguin is like, I need to get out of here. I mean, a lot of people would say, cheapers, if you cut off your ear because you are in such a terrible place, then maybe I can stay like a few days longer and maybe just look after you and then cut and run. But he doesn't even do that. Anyway, do you follow what I'm saying? So he goes on to say, if all goes well with Gauguin, you can see at this point that he will make it up with his wife and children. Well, he didn't. He didn't make it up. He says, certainly I should wish that for him. Well, then we must have more faith in the value of his pictures that his landlord has. But he must not overestimate them so much to you that you get only the burden and expense of the association instead of some profit. That must not be, and anyhow will not be, but you should have his best work from him. And I think the arrangement they ultimately came to was that Gauguin would paint one picture a month. And if you ask me, that's an incredibly good deal for Gauguin. Like Van Gogh was painting like, I don't know, 10 pictures a month, something like that. And they just wanted Gauguin to paint, I say this under correction, could be 1 or 2 pictures a month to pay for his way. And the incredible thing was that his art did actually ultimately sell. And that is why it went back as well. It was like, well, my art's selling, see ya, deal over. Anyway, so he says, I ought to warn you, I intend to keep several studies at the studio here instead of sending them to you. I think that if I carry on steadily with this plan of making the house here something really artistic, you will have a series of studies later on which will have a lasting value. So you kind of get the idea that now Van Gogh is painting for Van Gogh, if you think about it. And I don't think you can kind of overemphasize this. It's one thing to paint or to take photos or whatever, where you're kind of thinking, that's what you want. That's what my audience wants, right? It's totally different where you say, I don't give a, like, I'm doing this for me. I'm going to take a photo that I want in my house. I'm going to draw a picture to decorate my home. And so that is authentically Van Gogh. So if you want to get a sense of the real Van Gogh, well, then it is the sunflowers and to some extent like the night cafe and those sort of pictures, right? And that is actually when Van Gogh really, what's the word? Not only excels, but his art goes up a gear. It's after he goes through this period of, there's a house and I'm going to fill it up with pictures that I want around me, right? That he realizes this is essentially who I am. So after that realization that his art goes up a level. it's after that he paints all his best pictures, which I think is really interesting. So he goes on to say, I think that if I carry on steadily with this plan of making the house, you will have a series of studies with lasting value. Well, isn't that exactly what happened? By the way, Russell has replied in the negative about buying a Gauguin, but he asked me to go and stay with him for a while. But first and last are the traveling expenses. I do not say, just don't do that. I do not say, however, that he will not buy a Gauguin, for he will realize himself that he isn't being very benevolent just now. But after all, in building a house, provided that he puts people up in it, he's doing a very necessary work against the time when our landlord kicks us out. Goodbye for now and a good handshake. Ever yours, Vincent. Okay, and so the very last that I'm going to deal with is this one from 12 September. And some of the paintings it references is this one, Old Mill, which was painted in Arles. Rocks with Oak Tree. I'm not going to show you the Sower. It's, to me, one of his ugliest paintings. And then again, Night Cafe on Place Lamartine. I think this Night Cafe is really right around the corner from where he lives, because that's Place Lamartine anyway. So let's go through this letter. Ashton says we have only Micah's art on the wall. I do think it helps him create more. That's interesting as well. Okay, so Snow Lion says Gauguin strikes me as an uncaring person. Yeah. Linda says I read where Gauguin had a naturally pugilistic temperament. I bet Van Gogh had a sense of that. Yeah. Good word, that, pugilistic. Okay, so let's deal with this last letter. 12 September 1888. My dear Theo, if Gauguin were working with me and if for his part, let me read that again. If Gauguin were working with me and if for his part he were fairly generous with pictures, doesn't it mean that you would be giving work to two artists who could do nothing without you? And while admitting that I think you are perfectly justified in saying that as far as money is concerned, you see no advantage in it, yet on the other hand, you would be doing the same sort of thing as Durand Ruel, who bought pictures from Claude Monet in the days before anybody else had recognized his individuality. So what's really quite amusing in a way, quite funny in a way, is how good Van Gogh is at making kind of a legal argument, where he's able to kind of dive into kind of art history, is able to kind of dive into the backstories of artists for his own, you know, to take advantage of that for his own purposes. And so Yuri does that. He basically says, you know what, if you do this, it's just the same as what Durand Ruel did with Claude Monet. Okay. And I don't know, is it self-fulfilling prophecy? The fact that Theo does that, and then ultimately these letters became part of art history. It did become kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't know if Van Gogh could have been nearly as successful as he is, popular as he is, beloved as he is without these letters. Really, like they go together. The words go with the art. And, you know, the other thing is if he was a shitty writer, you know, he wrote a lot of letters, but if the letters were kind of banal and idiotic, I don't think he'd be the kind of respected artist that he is either. I mean, I find actually his writing more compelling than his art much of the time. And so I'm just saying he would make a really, really good lawyer. I mean, sometimes he makes he's in a terrible pickle, or he makes a terrible argument basically sound kind of quite reasonable. Anyway, so here he says Durand Ruel made nothing on it, and at one time he was overloaded with the pictures and could not pass them on. but still what he did remains well done. I mean, if you just think about it in a very basic way, one brother who really doesn't earn anything for like 5 years basically convinces his other brother who does earn something, who is quite respectable, and during that period gets married and has a child, to support him regardless. um, I think it's not just Theo that's sort of a benevolent sibling. It's also Vincent, who's a very convincing negotiator, right? He is able to um, ultimately convince his brother to support him. Anyway, so Zircon says he does have a way with words, right? What I find extraordinary is going through these letters today. It's like 130 years later, and it feels so contemporary. It feels so like it obviously wasn't written in English, but the translation is so contemporary, and only now and then is there a word that's out of place, like what timorous, right? And that just makes it kind of more interesting. So he goes on to say, if, however, I saw it would mean losing money, I wouldn't suggest it. I mean, this is coming from Vincent van Gogh. I'm making this suggestion. I mean, just look at what we're talking about. I'm making the suggestion, Theo. You know what? And if I thought that we were going to lose money, I wouldn't say anything about it. It's like, you know what? You've been losing money for days, weeks, months, years. And he's got that sort of temerity to say, if this thing that I'm suggesting would mean losing money, I wouldn't suggest it. I don't know. It's hilarious in a way. Anyway, but Gauguin, he says, but Gauguin must be loyal. And now that I see that his friend Laval's arrival has temporarily opened a new resource to him, I think that he's hesitating between Laval and us. So you do get the sense that Vincent van Gogh knows that Gauguin is doing an eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I've got these options between this and that. What am I going to do? The other thing is, he says Gauguin must be loyal. Do you think Gauguin was loyal? Because the fact is, at Vincent's funeral, Gauguin didn't even pitch up to Vincent's funeral. In fact, I think Gauguin said in the aftermath to Vincent's death, you know what, he was crazy. He was a crazy guy. Not a very nice thing to say. And I think that those words from Gauguin really resonated. In a weird way, those words carried tremendous, and I think it's also Gauguin's narrative of Van Gogh, Gauguin's self-reinforcing narrative. In other words, it makes him look like the good guy and Van Gogh look like the bad guy, also carried a tremendous weight with it, that the Van Goghs didn't oppose. But the question is, was Gauguin loyal? No, he wasn't. He abandoned Van Gogh the moment Van Gogh was at his weakest. Him losing his ear was one of the weakest moments in Van Gogh's entire life. And Gauguin, and just look at all the things Van Gogh is doing for his friend. He's preparing the house, he's brokering the business arrangement with his brother, he's buying the bed, buying the linen, decorating the house, and Gauguin will come there, stay 2 months, and at the drop of a hat leave. That's very disloyal. That's a kick in the pants, right? And not only is that disloyal, but what Gauguin would say about Vincent behind his back would be also disloyal. The pictures he would paint of Vincent would also be kind of insulting. And Vincent himself would be like, gee, is this what you think about me? Is this what you really think about me, kind of thing? And so these words are quite, again, portentous. Gauguin must be loyal. Well, he wasn't going to be. He's not loyal to his own family. And as I say, he wouldn't be very loyal even when Vincent was dead. He would continue to be basically an arsehole, right? There you have it. There's the word, jerk. So that is really the situation. Is Vincent's getting more and more nervous anticipation. He's kind of giddy with anticipation for a jerk that is going to be coming onto the scene. And this jerk is going to tear his little, sensitive heart and his sensitive world to pieces. And he's going to struggle to recover from that. It's going to take him about a year to get over the kick in the pants that he's about to get, right? And the fact that Gorgan goes on and lives happily ever after kind of makes it all worse. Gorgan, who treats him so shabbily, Gorgan, it's almost like if Brian Laundrie slapped Gabby, and Gabby told the police that she'd abused Brian, and then they locked her up. And then Brian then went and he finished the van life adventure, and his social media took off, and he ended up this sort of YouTube star. You can imagine how Gabby would be devastated, not just by what happened to her, but by the sort of contrast of the person that she trusted going on to live happily ever after, when her experience with that person pushes her into a nightmare. It's that as well. It's the exchange where that comes at such great cost to one person, and the other person gets like a massive boost, and there's no turning back. It's quite hard to be sort of Timmy, you're getting cold. So I actually took Timmy for a walk, and then I take his coat off. I actually need to put it back on. You're a good boy. Hmm? You're good dog. Okay, so he says, I don't blame him, but if Gorgan does not lose sight of his own interest, it is only fair that you should not lose sight of yours. So all of this is kind of like, I don't think Van Gogh is that naive. He seems to actually know what is not at stake, but what is on the cards. And he says here, don't lose sight of your own interest. And you could say that about Van Gogh as well. Cheapers, don't be a nothing and a nobody next. Don't, like in terms of the yellow house, you're giving this dude the best room in the house, and you're giving yourself like the worst room. Don't lose sight of your own interest. He could very well make that same argument in terms of Gorgana to himself. And he is very correct to be worried about Gorgan only thinking of his own interest. And isn't that what he did? Already we can see that Gorgan would already have left us completely in the lurch. Look at those words. Gorgan isn't even arrived, and Vincent is writing to his brother about Gorgan leaving us in the lurch, leaving us in the lurch. If Laval had ever so little money, I'm very curious to know what he will say to you in the next letter, which you will certainly get soon. So, like someone might say, Van Gogh was really naive. He wasn't street smart at all. He didn't really have a lot of social skills or whatever. Well, everything that he's saying is almost like a warning, even before Gorgan gets there. And he's right about all of those things. Is this guy going to be loyal? Is he going to leave us in the lurch? And so, people so often say in true crime, didn't that person see the warnings, the red flags? Well, yes, they do, but they kind of hopeful or optimistic, or they count on things working out. And we've all made those mistakes. You're sort of aware that someone has certain red flags in their past, and you sort of say, oh, well, I'm aware of that, let's see how things go. And then sometimes things don't work out, and sometimes things don't work out spectacularly, right? He says, well, I'm sure that our friendship with him will endure whether he comes or not, but also that we on our own, also that we on our part must show some firmness. He will not find anything better unless indeed it were by taking advantage of what you have tried to do for him. So even here, he talks about this idea of Gauguin taking advantage. What do you think is happening? But he will not. But he will not dare do. I think he means he will not dare try that. Only you must understand that if I see he isn't coming, I shall not be the least upset, and I shall not work the less for it. If he comes, he'll be very welcome, but I see clearly that counting on him would be just the thing to do us in. Again, that's quite a statement to make. Counting on him, to be clear, Vincent is saying, I see clearly that counting on Gauguin would be just the thing to do us in. And guess what? Those are exactly the same words that he used to describe Dr. Gachet. He kind of described Dr. Gachet as we cannot count on him. I don't know if you remember that. If you've read my book, you probably know about that. Okay, so he says, faithful he will be if it is to his advantage. If he does not come, he will find something else, but he will find nothing better and he would lose nothing by not letting us down. Okay. I'll need another 5 meters of ordinary canvas at 2 francs 50, but of course, when Tassé is figuring the weight of the parcel, he should send a meter more or a meter less so as not to double the carriage. I think now is a good opportunity for you to ask Gauguin bluntly when he writes to you, are you coming or not? If you have not made up your mind one way or the other, we shall not feel bound to carry out the scheme. So they can't get a straight answer out of him, right? Then he says, if the plan of a more serious combination cannot be carried out, all right, but then each should regain his freedom of action. I've sent off my letter to Gauguin. I ask them for an exchange. If they are willing, I would very much like to have here the portrait of Bernard by Gauguin and that of Gauguin by Bernard. I enclose an article which will interest you. You'd be very wise to go and see this. Ideas from my work are coming to me in swarms, so that though I'm alone, I've no time to think or to feel. I go on painting like a steam engine. I think there will hardly ever be a standstill again. And my view is that you'll never find a live studio ready-made, but that it is created from day to day by patient work and going on in one place. I have a study of an old mill painted in broken tones like the oak tree on the rock. That study you were saying you had framed along with the sower. The idea of the sower continues to haunt me all the time. Exaggerated studies like the sower and like this night cafe usually seem to me atrociously ugly and bad. Well, I'm relieved to see that. I'm relieved to see him saying that the sower is atrociously ugly and bad. I really don't like this painting. I think it's ugly, terrible, just horrible. But I don't feel the same about this. And I mean, this is not the. Let me see if I can get a better. The actual tones aren't quite those. See if I can. Night Cafe. Van Gogh. It's a little bit difficult typing with one hand when your other one's around your dog. So this gives you a little bit of a better idea of what the picture actually looks like. It's a little bit better. I actually quite like this picture. I mean, it does have a certain ugliness to it, but I certainly prefer it to the sower by some margin. But anyway, I'm just saying I'm grateful that he calls the sower ugly and bad, because it is. But he says, but when I'm moved by something, as now by this article on Dostoevsky, then these are the only ones which appear to have any deep meaning. I have a third study now of a landscape with a factory and a huge sun in a red sky above red roofs, a day with a wicked mistral when nature seems to be in a fury. Well, that's quite interesting. That painting has been lost, right? So fraudsters, if you're watching this, if you want to want a little what's a little if you want a little backdoor into selling a fake Van Gogh, well, nobody knows where this painting is, so maybe you want to, you know. So he talks about a landscape with a factory, a huge sun in a red sky, and he talks about a wicked mistral. I wonder what that painting involved. I wonder what that painting really looked like. Anyway, he says, as for the house, the thought that it's going to be habitable continues to soothe me. But will my work really be worse because by staying in the same place, I shall see the seasons pass and repass over the same subject, seeing again the same orchards in the spring, the same fields of wheat in the summer. Involuntarily, I shall see my work cut out for me beforehand, and I shall be better able to make plans. That's how he sees it, and I think that is so true. When you in one place, your sense of perspective improves when you can anticipate what, for example, the passing of the seasons. Then if I keep some studies here, sorry about that. If I keep some studies here to make a coherent whole, it will mean work of a deeper calm at the end of a certain time. I feel that as far as that goes, we have done pretty much the right thing. Only I wish you were living nearer. Seeing that I cannot bring the north nearer the south, what's to be done? Then I tell myself that by myself, I'm not able to do sufficiently important painting to justify your coming south 2 or 3 times a year. But if Gauguin came, and if it was fairly well known that we were staying here and helping artists live and work, I still do not see at all why the south should not become another native land to you as well as to me. I'm very glad to have finished my letter to Gauguin without having said that his wavering between staying with Laval or with me has left me rather at sea. So there is a little bit of an insight into how he's actually feeling. I mean, in his own words, he says, I'm feeling at sea. He's feeling restless, uncertain, uneasy, right? And it's only going to get worse. So although he's clear-headed, he's healthy physically and mentally, that health is now starting to be undermined by a jerk, by an arsehole, by someone who's not loyal, by a jerk, right? And that is going to be Van Gogh's undoing. And so I don't think you can say that, the poll is, was Gauguin's imminent arrival having an impact on Van Gogh's mental health? Yes. 90% to your credit say yes. Nobody says no. 10% say you can't blame Gauguin for that. Actually, you can. You can blame Gauguin for that. Gauguin is being an arsehole, right? He's a selfish guy, selfish jerk, right? So he says it would be unfair not to leave him perfectly free to choose and to do the best he can. But I did write that I was convinced that even if he did not come here because of the journeys being impossible, he should not stay in a hotel any longer, and that this would then mean 2 fixed studios instead of 1. I always come back to this, that once settled, one works more tranquilly, and in that position, one can always on occasion be more of a help to other people. Bernard says it grieves him to see how Gauguin is often prevented from doing what he could otherwise do for purely material reasons, paints, canvas, etc. Well, in any case, that can't go on. The worst that can happen to him is that he will be obliged to leave his pictures in pledge for what he owes his landlord, and to take refuge either with you or with me by making the one-way journey. But in this case, if he does not want to lose his pictures, he must definitely tackle his landlord. A case like that, in which the goods are at all events worth more than the debt, might be tried expressly by the president of the civil tribunal. So there is talking about a court case, dealing with Gauguin's rights and his situation in terms of his finances, assuming the landlord should want to keep the whole, which he has no right to do. And then the end of this letter, unfortunately, is missing. One wonders where the letter went from this point onwards. One also wonders whether the end of the letter is missing by bad luck, or did the Van Gogh family actually hide it away? What did he actually say that the end of the letter is missing? What did he say? It just is interesting. So that's the 12th of September, 1888. And then the next letter is to his sister Wilhelmina, and that's where we're going to continue in the next episode. So I hope this is almost 2 hours long. I hope you found this analysis, it's like taking us closer to the climax of the story, which is December 1888, and we're now 3.5 months from there. Obviously, October, sort of mid-October, November, and December, when Gauguin is there, that's really a soap opera of its own. And I really can't wait for us to get there. Timmy, can you wait? Timmy, I'm going to put you down. I need to put myself down quite soon. It's 1 o'clock in the morning here. I actually want to go for a little walk outside. I don't know if it's ill-advised, but I kind of get the feeling some people are wandering around, breaking into places, and I'd like to, I don't know, do you just go to bed and hope for the best? So I don't know. I just maybe I'm going to go for a little walk around, see if I can see anything. Snowline says, fascinating. I'm going back to the beginning to hear the first half hour. Masterclass in Van Gogh. Yeah, and I mean, I think I said this to Stephanie L. The vaunted art experts, the people who supposedly know Van Gogh that well, have they read all of his letters? I doubt it. And I didn't feel like I needed to read all of his letters to get Van Gogh, but it doesn't do any harm. You do get to know. I mean, I've read a lot of his letters, especially between from basically October to the end of his life. I've gone through a lot of his letters. These letters that we've gone through now are the letters that I'm less familiar with, but they've definitely reinforced what I've felt all along. And that's definitely good to see. I thought maybe I'm going to come across something that's going to prove me wrong and I'm going to have to unpublish my book or something. So far, I haven't come across anything like that. And in the with the art experts just repeat what all the other art experts say. You kind of have the same thing in true crime. Someone has a particular position on whatever, the West Memphis Three, JonBenet Ramsey, and then all the others just fall in line and say the same thing. And that's how easy it is for a counterfeit narrative to become a counterfeit narrative. Cornelia says, thanks for another great live. It's so wonderful to hear your comments and analysis. Thanks, Cornelia. Yeah, motion cameras. I have actually already sent a letter. I've got to get permission to put them up, so I have sent the letter, so we'll see. It's not, I don't want to be confrontational. I just want to see if people are walking around, that's all. Thanks a lot, Deborah. So for those who are watching this on replay, you're welcome to hit the thanks button. The Team Peachtree channel is definitely the poorer of the two channels, but if anything, I spend a lot more time on lives on Team Peachtree. So if you're feeling generous, if you're enjoying the content here, you're welcome to whatever, hit the thanks button. I'm going to be trying to keep up 2 episodes a week. So basically Wednesday, if I can't manage to do a Wednesday, it might be a Tuesday or a Thursday or whatever, but basically Wednesday and weekend. So I'm going to try and do twice, just because we can't really afford to miss. We've got to be consistent over, but from now until the year incident. And you don't really want to lose the gist of the story that we're in now. So I hope those of you watching, I'm going to see you guys next week, and I'm sure I will. I sort of feel like I'm preaching to the converted. You guys know where this is going, and that it really is interesting and compelling. But I'm going to try and keep it up twice a week until we get to the ear incident, and we'll take it from there. Okay, let's go through the last couple of comments. By the way, I do want to, in preparation for yesterday's TCRS in America, I had to ultimately get all the photos off my phone and put them onto like an external drive. And now that I've done that, I can actually start taking you guys through so much of the stuff that I meant to do on Team Peachtree when I was in America, like the Avenue of the Giants and the credible national parks of Bryce Canyon and Zion. And so I kind of meant to do that while I was there. And it was just difficult because do you want to be editing videos when you could be hiking or whatever? But anyway, I'm now at the point where I've at last gotten all of that footage onto an external drive, and I can start putting things together. So I'm hoping to also do that over the next while. To be honest, I really need to get my audiobooks up and running again. So I'm going to try and have a really good week this coming week, just try and be productive. But of course, at the same time, I've got to worry about someone who's breaking and entering. And I've heard that someone else had a bicycle stolen around the corner from me just last night. So I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's a crime wave or I don't know. I'm going to try and educate myself and put up cameras as well, and hopefully that's going to make a difference. Thanks a lot, Deborah. Ison says, stay safe. Snowline says, I'm excited to see trip photos. Fart noises. Okay. Okay, guys. I'll see you guys probably Wednesday, and we will continue with mid-September 1888. So look out for that. Chelsea says, please stay safe. Please be careful. Yeah, no, the cops. That's what's quite hard to. What's the word? It's quite hard to share with if you're in America. You call the police and you feel like it's taken care of. People arrive and there's a sense that they're resourced and that they care and that they do something about it. Whereas here, there isn't that sense. You don't feel like they care. You don't feel like they're well resourced. You don't feel like anything's going to happen. It's not a nice. You kind of got to take care of your own security. Yeah, cameras are a good idea. Anyway, I'll keep you guys updated, and yeah, I might cover this aspect on TCRS on Patreon as a kind of an audio diary, because I mean it is something that I need to figure out and sort out. I mean, it's now TCRS literally dealing with actual crime one-on-one kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, guys. On that note, I don't really want to talk about crime on Team Peachtree, but it is a reality. Hope you guys have a good rest of your Father's Day weekend, and I'll see you guys next time. All the best. Ciao.